At EO 853 on March 9, 1862, Lieutenant Samuel Dana Greene stood in the gun turret of the USS Monitor, watching through his narrow viewing slit as a massive grey hulk materialized through morning fog on Hampton Roads. The CSS Virginia, 262 feet of floating iron fortress bearing down at 5 knots. Greene was 22 years old. He'd been aboard Monitor for exactly 6 days. The ship beneath his feet had nearly sunk twice during the voyage from New York. Now he commanded its only weapons, 2 11-inch Dahlgren smoothbore cannons, each capable of firing 166-pound solid shot. His gun crew consisted of 16 men crammed into a revolving turret 20 feet in diameter, 9 feet tall, walls 8 inches thick. The Virginia had spent the previous day destroying the Union fleet. 5 wooden warships, 250 dead sailors, 1 ship rammed and sunk, another burned to the waterline. Cannonballs had bounced off Virginia's iron casemate like pebbles. By nightfall, the Confederate ironclad had proven that every wooden navy in the world was obsolete. Monitor arrived after dark, 172 feet long, deck just 18 inches above water, revolutionary turret design that could rotate 360 degrees. No one had ever fought from a ship like this. No one knew if the experimental design would even work in combat. Greene's orders were simple: stop the Virginia from destroying the grounded frigate Minnesota. The Virginia carried 10 guns. Monitor had 2. Virginia's crew numbered 320. Monitor carried 59. Virginia displaced 4,000 tons. Monitor displaced 987. At Aero 900, Virginia's bowgun fired. The shell screamed across 300 yards of water and slammed into Monitor's turret. The impact sounded like a locomotive hitting a brick wall. The shell ricocheted upward and splashed into Hampton Roads. No penetration. The 8-inch iron held. Greene ordered return fire. His gun crew had practiced the loading sequence exactly 3 times. The turret rotated with grinding metallic shrieks. At 0903, both Dahlgren guns fired simultaneously. 4,000 pounds of recoil force shook the turret. Through the clearing smoke, Greene saw both shots strike Virginia's casemate dead center. No visible damage. The iron deflected everything. The Virginia's commander, Flag Officer Franklin Buchanan, had been wounded the previous day. Lieutenant Catesby A.P. Roger Jones now commanded. Jones had spent 8 months converting the burned hull of USS Merrimac into this iron monster. He knew every rivet, every plate, every gun. He'd expected to finish destroying the Union fleet today. Instead, he faced something no naval officer had ever confronted: an enemy that couldn't be sunk by conventional means. Both ships began circling each other at point-blank range, 100 yards, 50 yards, sometimes close enough that men could have jumped between decks. The Virginia fired 10-inch explosive shells. Monitor responded with solid shot. Neither could penetrate the other's armor. Shells that should have torn through wooden hulls bounced off at oblique angles or shattered on impact. Inside Monitor's turret, the noise was unbearable. Each hit produced concussive waves that knocked men off their feet. Bolts securing the iron plates sheared off and became projectiles inside the turret. Paint chips and iron flakes filled the air. Greene's men stuffed cotton in their ears. It didn't help. Several suffered ruptured eardrums. One man's nose started bleeding from the pressure changes. Monitor's ventilation system couldn't handle the gun smoke. Sulphurous clouds filled the turret between shots. Men coughed and gagged while loading the massive Dahlgren guns. Each cannon required 15 pounds of black powder. Each solid shot weighed 166 pounds. The loading sequence took 7 minutes under ideal conditions. In combat, with smoke and noise and concussive impacts, it took longer. Lieutenant Jones tried ramming. Virginia's bow carried a 1,500-pound iron ram that had punched through USS Cumberland's hull the day before, sinking her in minutes. At 10:15, Virginia built speed and struck Monitor's hull at a glancing angle. The impact jarred both ships. Monitor's iron belt held. But the ram broke off Virginia's bow, lost somewhere in the muddy bottom of Hampton Roads. Monitor's captain, Lieutenant John Warden, commanded from the pilot house, a separate iron structure 20 feet forward of the turret. 9-inch iron walls with narrow viewing slits. Worden stood inches from these slits, trying to navigate while shells exploded around him. He communicated with Greene via speaking tube and messenger. The system was crude. Orders took minutes to transmit. Both men operated partially blind. Virginia tried a new tactic. Jones ordered his gunners to load exploding shells with short fuses, hoping they'd detonate against Monitor's armor rather than bouncing off. At 11:07, 3 shells struck Monitor's deck in rapid succession. All 3 exploded. The blast scorched paint and bent iron plates. None penetrated. Monitor's deck armor was 1 inch thick on top of wooden backing, crude but effective. Greene ordered reduced powder charges. Monitor's Dahlgren guns were designed for 30-pound charges when firing explosive shells. For solid shot at close range, regulations specified 15 pounds. But Greene suspected heavier charges might crack Virginia's armor. He increased to 20 pounds. Still not enough. Virginia's casemate iron was 4 inches thick over 24 inches of wood backing. Monitor's shots created dents, nothing more. At 11:30, both ships broke off to assess damage and reload. Monitor had fired 41 shots. Virginia had fired 50. Neither had achieved decisive hits. Both crews were exhausted. The battle had lasted 2.5 hours. Nothing like this had ever happened before. Naval warfare operated on the assumption that sufficient firepower would eventually sink any ship. That assumption had just been invalidated. Virginia needed to finish the Minnesota. The grounded frigate represented the last major Union warship in Hampton Roads. Jones ordered his gunners to ignore Monitor and focus on Minnesota. At 11:45, Virginia approached to within 200 yards of the grounded ship and opened fire. Monitor immediately moved between them. The ironclads resumed their deadly dance. Worden brought Monitor within 50 yards of Virginia's stern. At that range, Monitor's guns couldn't miss. At 1200, both Dahlgrens fired simultaneously into Virginia's rudder assembly. The shots struck within inches of each other. Virginia's steering went loose. For 10 minutes, Jones couldn't control his ship's heading. Monitor hammered the stern with 3 more full broadsides, but Monitor's ammunition supply was running low. Greene had started with 50 rounds of solid shot. He'd fired 47. The gun crews were operating on muscle memory alone. Several men had collapsed from heat exhaustion. The turret temperature exceeded 110 degrees. Powder smoke reduced visibility to arm's length. At 12:15, Virginia's gunners achieved a perfect shot. A 7-inch Brook rifle shell struck Monitor's pilot house directly in the viewing slit. The explosion occurred 3 feet from Worden's face. The flash temporarily blinded him. Burning powder filled the pilot house. Worden staggered backward, hands over his eyes. Blood streamed down his face from lacerations caused by iron fragments. Monitor went dead in the water. Greene, in the turret, had no idea what happened. The speaking tube went silent. A messenger finally reached him 8 minutes later. Worden was unconscious. Greene now commanded the ship. He faced a choice: continue fighting blind or withdraw to assess casualties and damage. Greene ordered Monitor to pull back into shallow water where Virginia couldn't follow. Virginia drew 22 feet. Monitor drew 10. Virginia's pilot warned Jones that the tide was falling. If they didn't leave soon, Virginia would ground on the shoals. At 12:30, Virginia turned south toward Norfolk Navy Yard. Monitor maintained defensive position near Minnesota, but didn't pursue. The battle ended at 12:34, 4 hours and 6 minutes after the first shot. Both ships claimed victory. Virginia had driven Monitor away from the engagement zone. Monitor had prevented Virginia from destroying Minnesota. Neither claim was wrong, neither was entirely true. The strategic result was clear. Wooden warships were finished. Within weeks, Britain suspended construction on all wooden ships of the line. France converted existing hulls to ironclads. Every major navy immediately began designing armored vessels. 3,000 years of naval warfare doctrine became obsolete in a single morning. The tactical lessons were more subtle. Armor defeated smoothbore guns at close range. Ramming didn't work against iron hulls. Revolving turrets provided massive tactical advantages over fixed broadside guns. But the most important lesson was psychological. Sailors who survived that day knew they'd witnessed the birth of modern naval warfare. Lieutenant Worden recovered his sight after several weeks. He received a promotion and command of a new Monitor-class ironclad. Lieutenant Greene continued serving aboard Monitor. He survived the ship's sinking during a storm off Cape Hatteras on December 31, 1862. 16 men went down with the ship. Lieutenant Catesby Jones remained with Virginia until the Confederacy evacuated Norfolk on May 11, 1862. Rather than let Union forces capture the ironclad, Confederate engineers scuttled her in the Elizabeth River. Jones watched his ship burn and explode. He'd commanded her for exactly 63 days. Neither ship survived the war, but their impact echoed for decades. The Battle of Hampton Roads forced every navy to rethink armor, propulsion, and weapon design. It accelerated the development of rifled guns, armor-piercing shells, and steam propulsion. It made the battleship possible. March 9, 1862 didn't look like a decisive battle. No fleet destroyed, no territory captured, tactical draw. But paradigm shifts rarely look dramatic in the moment. They look like iron against iron, guns firing without effect, old rules breaking down. The revolution happens afterward, when everyone realizes nothing will ever be the same again.